All right. Amazing. Hi. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Lauren Clemens. I'm the head of marketing at Pipestream, and I am super excited to bring you guys yet another Pipe Up webinar today. I am very excited to introduce Sophia Visitu. She is a solution designer, solution design lead at Pipestream, where she leverages AI automation and conversational design principles to create custom solutions that solve enterprise problems. Prior to her nearly 4-year tenure at Pipestream, she was a consultant at IBM, specializing in Watson AI implementations. She holds a BS in cognitive and brain science with a linguistics concentration from Tufts University and is currently working towards an AAS in fashion design at FIT. So, without further ado, Sophia, please take it away.
Thank you, Lauren.
Of course.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. And thank you, Lauren, for that intro. So yeah, I'm Sophia. It's really great to meet you. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about NLU today. So I'm just going to get into a bit of what NLU even is, just establishing some baseline definitions, what the benefits are of leveraging it in a customer experience situation, some examples you've probably encountered in the wild, as well as some examples we work on here at Pipestream, and then just some sort of tips and themes as far as approaching implementation, and then taking a few steps back, just thinking ahead to what we might see in 2024 and beyond. And then there'll be a few minutes at the end for Q&A. So getting into it, what is NLU? The acronym stands for Natural Language Understanding, and it really is kind of a catch-all term for any algorithms or approaches that enable machine understanding of spoken or written natural human language. And natural human language really just means the way that two human beings might talk to each other, whether it's an in-person conversation, an email, maybe a casual text conversation, any of those different sort of modalities and registers of communication. And NLU falls under the more broad umbrella of NLP, natural language processing, and it's an interdisciplinary field that involves bits and pieces from linguistics, AI, computer science, all these different approaches. I like this visual here because I think it illustrates how NLU fits into the overall scope of NLP. I think it also calls out, obviously with all the conversation and the excitement over large language models, generative AI, there's questions around like the extent to which these fields overlap or if they're the same thing. So I think and I'll get into this a bit more later, but I think the critical difference to keep in mind is that NLU does not attempt to generate novel language or write things on the cuff, off the cuff, the way something like ChatGPT might. It aims only to understand what human beings are saying. As far as the sort of core components of human language that any NLU approach might have to contend with, a lot of these just come out of linguistics. So there's elements like syntax, which is the question of breaking sentences down grammatically, understanding parts of speech, all those different sort of rules that dictate the way language operates. Semantics, so what words even mean, across different languages, and then pragmatics, or sort of context clues. So, how do we interpret the way a sentence or what a word means given the context in which that conversation is taking place? So all of these sort of play a role in achieving natural language understanding. And then as far as applications that you might encounter that heavily leverage NLU, virtual assistants is a big one that is near and dear to our hearts here at Pipestream. That's very much sort of the world we live in as far as NLU applications. But, text classification, like automated labeling of articles or emails, sentiment analysis. So, social media, like understanding social media sentiment for like a new product or a piece of news that's circulating, or a smart search, if you're trying to Google something and you're getting like results suggested to you that are contextual. All of those applications leverage NLU to some extent. And then why might you consider leveraging it in a CX, or kind of customer service situation. So the benefits, there are benefits on sort of both sides of the conversation here, for the customers who are interfacing with NLU, and then for businesses who are considering leveraging it. So for customers, a big one is that it just enables communication in a way that is more naturalistic and human, and that is more similar to how human beings are used to talking to each other. So, they can have a conversation with a computer or an application in the same way they might with somebody on the phone. And that is that enables us to meet customers where they are, and create a better experience. That also makes navigation easier if they're interfacing with an application and they might have a particular goal in mind, but not necessarily know which of the various multi-layered menus they have to click through to find what they're looking for. So in this way, with NLU, they can just state what it is and we can take them directly to where they want to go, rather than forcing them to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. And I think also when we pull in voice capabilities, so a speech to text layer that maybe takes in something I'm saying out loud and transcribes it to text, I think that does a lot as far as convenience and accessibility in communication, for users who use screen readers, or maybe just someone who is really busy at the moment and can't use their hands to navigate through an application. The ability to just say something out loud and accomplish the task that you have in mind is a really powerful one. And then for businesses that have NLU capabilities, they are getting that creates a really rich source of data as far as seeing what your actual users are coming in and asking about. Like, what are they looking for? What are their goals? What are the things they're asking? And are those things being addressed? And that can really help to identify gaps and then prioritize those for the future. The additional flexibility and convenience of offering an NLU interface can really boost customer satisfaction. And it can also just speed up some of the more time-consuming business flows and just move users through those processes more quickly. And then moving into some key concepts. So there are obviously a lot of different NLU applications and algorithms that all use sort of different methods. So these key concepts aren't necessarily the most relevant ones for every single NLU application, but for the type of NLU we work with here at Pipestream, and the type of NLU you see in a lot of customer service or virtual assistant use cases, it comes down to intent classification and entity extraction. So intents you can think of as sort of the core, the key action or goal that a user is expressing in their utterance, in the thing that they're saying. And if you are leveraging a custom NLU model, you will have likely gone through an exercise where you think through, okay, like what are the 25, 30 different topics I want my NLU to be able to address and recognize and respond to, like what's in scope for my use case. So and you will have gone through a process of training the model to recognize those intents. So a key function of these algorithms is really to identify when a user comes in and says something, to identify one or more intents that are in their sentence based on the way you've trained that model. And then on the other side, we have entity extraction. So entities you can think of as more sort of specific keywords or little chunks of information that can help us to narrow down or further contextualize or just like enrich the information that we're getting from the intent. So these can be more structured and appear in more consistent formats. So for things like phone numbers or emails, there's very specific formatting rules that allow us to recognize those pieces of information. Or they can be a little more unstructured, where maybe it's like cities or names of political figures or colors even. So these two can really be leveraged together to create a pretty advanced NLU experience. So as far as how they work together, so this is kind of an airline use case, which is one we worked on here at Pipestream. So let's say a user comes in and they say that they want to book a flight from JFK to Paris on January 4th in business class. So at a high level, we understand their intent, which is to book a flight. They're telling us, hey, I want to book a flight. So we can grab onto that if we've accounted for that in our training data and understand that's what the user is trying to do and take them to, wherever that function or transaction lives. But they're not just telling us they want to book a flight. They're also giving us a lot of other information about that flight that we need to complete that transaction for them. So they're telling us they want to depart from JFK. So that's an airport. So we presumably would have an entity type that looks for airports. That can be a more structured entity type if it's airport codes, because those are all 3 characters. But if someone's giving the full name, it can get a little more complicated. But we can extract that. And then they're telling us they want to go to Paris. So that tells us their destination, and that's a city entity type. And there's also, we can also look out for like the relationship between those 2 entity types. So they're telling us the directionality. The word from is telling us they want to leave from somewhere. The word to is telling us they want to end up at that place. So we can sort of layer in a lot of logic here to understand not only are there 2 places in the sentence, but they exist in a particular relationship to each other. The user is also providing us the date they want to travel on, January 4th, as well as the business class. So in this way, we can, if we're prepared to extract all of this information, we can cut out a lot of steps out of the transactional process that the user has to go through to book this flight. So, we don't have to ask them to type in their destination again. Like, we already know when they're going, where they're going, what class they want to fly. So if we leverage the intent and the entity side of things together, we can really make very efficient processes that improve the customer experience of this user who's trying to book this flight. Okay, and then I guess stepping away from theory and more into practical applications you've probably seen in the wild. A very obvious one is personal digital assistants that might live on your phone. So Siri, or maybe your smart speaker in your house. These leverage kind of multi-layered tech stacks that rely heavily on NLU in order to do the things that they do. So there's the speech to text layer that I mentioned, where you're saying something out loud in your room, Siri's grabbing onto that and sort of transcribing it, turning it into text. And then there's an NLU component to understand maybe your intent, your entities. So like in the flight scenario, maybe all of that information will be extracted, and then Siri might do like a search to see what flights are available for booking. So NLU really plays a key role in the technology that so many people use for personal digital assistants. Social media also makes heavy use of NLU to understand just at a high level what people are posting about. So Facebook has deep text, which is their kind of proprietary deep learning text understanding engine that has a lot of different components to it, including NLU, but it is able to comprehend text across multiple languages. It's able to understand the sentiment present in users' posts and interactions, and rapid text classification for what users are actually saying in their posts can sort of provide the most up-to-date functionality or content based on what they're expressing. Email filtering algorithms is a big one where you might, depending on which email provider you use, you might see incoming emails automatically sorted into this bucket for promotions, this bucket for social media, this bucket for spam. So there are a lot of different components to these algorithms, but NLU is a part of them. And obviously this makes our lives a lot easier because we don't have to sort through 2,000 emails we don't really care about to get to the stuff that really needs a response. And then lastly, automatic web page translation. If you've ever, if you're an English speaker and you've ended up on a website that is not in English, your browser may have said, hey, do you want to translate this to English? So there's NLU involved in detecting what the source language even is. And then if you do want to translate, instantaneously turning it into English. These, I guess, technologies rely very heavily on NLU. And then here are some examples that we've worked on at Pipestream. So back to my favorite airline use case. This is pretty similar to the example I showed you, but basically this user is expressing that they need to book a flight, and they're telling us where they're flying from and where they're flying to. So in one kind of fell swoop, we're able to identify the booking intent. We're able to extract the entities corresponding to their itinerary. And then we have some backend logic to map them to airport codes. So, converting the city of Frankfurt to like what the relevant airport is there. And then, the situation can get a little interesting when it's a city that has multiple airports associated to it that a given airline flies to. So maybe if this user needed a flight from Frankfurt to New York, we would say, great, do you want to fly into JFK, LaGuardia, or Newark? So we can do kind of all of these back end, I guess, post-processing steps after understanding via the NLU what the user is saying. And then this enables us to transition into the transactional flow much more quickly and just create kind of a better experience getting to that conversion at the end. And then on the right here, we have a more sort of insurance FAQ type use case where this user asks something relatively vague. I have a question about audits. So, that might map to a wide variety of content. So we are able to use various strategies around disambiguation, maybe multiple intent recognition if the user is expressing multiple things in one utterance, so that we can, even if we're not 100% positive what it is the user is asking about, we can serve the most relevant content to them and sort of save the conversation and make sure we're giving the user something, even if we don't know with 100% confidence what it is they're looking for. And then as far as implementation, it's NLU can obviously be a pretty daunting task. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of different options you have. So these are just kind of a couple things that we like to keep in mind when we are doing it here at Pipestream. So as far as the actual tool you're going to use, there are many, many options for different platforms and tools that approach or aim to implement NLU. And they all exist on the spectrum, I guess, where on one end you have completely open source, where it's like a much more sort of heavy data science task, where maybe you're just taking on the challenge and building your own sort of NLU algorithm. And that can be great if you need something extremely custom, maybe something extremely proprietary, or you're just looking for a fun data science challenge. And then on the other end, there are platforms that are very out of the box, that are very sort of easy, like no code, user-friendly GUIs, almost like drag and drop builders, where you just have to plug in your data and you can pretty quickly get something up and running. So as far as the option that's best for you, it kind of depends on what your end goal is, the nature of your data, and just the time and resources that you have available to address this implementation. But as far as out of the box platforms go, there are a number of them out there that are well known, very effective, easy to set up and play with, just to sort of familiarize yourself with some of the key concepts and the way that your data might look and feel once it's hooked up to an NLU model. And for some of these, they have kind of like free light plans. So you can sort of just play around before making like a significant time and financial commitment. So Dialogflow by Google, IBM Watson Assistant, Amazon Lex are some good ones off the top of my head, but there are definitely more out there. And then there's the question of user experience and design, because having training your model is one thing, but then once you have it, you need to think through how your users are actually going to be engaging and interacting with it and how it fits into the rest of your sort of processes or setup. So a lot of this comes down to just what the end goal is. So, you might want to build an NLU model that just guides users to the most relevant FAQ. You might want to build one that really focuses on entity extraction to speed up maybe transactional processes. You might care mostly about user sentiment, and understanding how, what emotional state your users are in and then responding accordingly. So those questions are going to drive the nature of your data collection and just the way that you set up and leverage your model. And from a UX perspective, especially, your V1 model that you put out in the world is probably not going to be perfect. Like there are always things you fail to consider or just surprises that come along the way. So there will be gaps around like intents that get confused with each other. Utterances that users come in and express that are just completely out of scope. You just had no idea someone would even be asking about that, or just variations in how users express themselves. There might be like a synonym that you had no idea about for some word that is central to your model. So just keeping in mind, with the unhappy path, let's say your model has no idea what your user is asking about. Like, how are you going to save that interaction so the user doesn't just get trapped in a loop or really frustrated? Like, how can we still be useful from a CX perspective, even if our model doesn't do what we want it to do? Moving on to data. So your data needs are going to be very dependent on the type of thing you're building and the type of tool you're using to build it. But as far as the intent classification approach, that we largely do here at Pipestream that I was describing. The goal is for each intent that you want your model to recognize, to train it on at least 10 to 15, hopefully more, utterances, which should resemble the way that your real users will actually be asking about those topics in real life. And the main goal here is to just capture as much variability as possible, so that your model is trained to identify the different ways that someone might express the same topic. Um, Best case scenario, that data comes from real conversations that have taken place in the past. Like if you have a resource available to you, such as like transcripts from an existing contact center, to extract data from, that's really great. But that's not always going to be the case, or you might just not have enough data derived that way. So there might be some element of synthetic data creation as well, just to get things off the ground until your model has been live long enough that you can sort of iteratively improve it with real user data. And then testing and analytics is a big one. The nature of model improvement over time is just inherently very iterative. You go live, you see how it goes, you see where the gaps are, you put more training data in it, and just onwards and onwards. So keep staying on top of testing and analytics is critical to, I guess, preserve the kind of momentum of that process. So prior to your model going live, it's good to conduct thorough testing with different types of people who are going to interact and engage with the model in different types of ways. And then after going live, at a regular cadence, it's good to retrieve sort of real data from the way, things that real users are typing into your model, analyzing the way that your model is performing on that data, and identifying gaps, and then addressing those gaps. So a number of things could come out of that type of analysis. You might find that users are asking about something you failed to anticipate, so that would be a situation where you might add new intents. You might find that there are a few intents that are very similar and keep kind of getting confused with each other. That might be a reason to combine them. You might have to bolster existing intents that just aren't being triggered frequently enough, or maybe even delete intents. So there's a lot of different approaches you can take to continually improve a model. And then lastly, looking ahead. So NLU it's been a pretty exciting field for, a few decades now, but obviously the larger sort of world of AI and LLMs is very like front and center right now. So I think a big thing we're going to see is just kind of approaches that combine LLMs with NLU. So the sort of advantage of using NLU is that it's in terms of what the users are seeing, like what the application is saying to users once we've identified their intent, that is all still sort of pre-written content. So it's very reliable. There's no like liability issue where, users are always going to be seeing stuff that has been vetted, as opposed to LLMs where it's making stuff up on the fly. So there's like a little, there's a little bit of risk there. But at the same time, that's what gives it the sort of very dynamic and conversational and delightful nature that NLU doesn't have so much. So I think that if we can really combine these two and use the NLU to handle some things, whereas for areas that are like a bit more creative and open-ended, use the LLMs, I think that can really create like a best of both worlds situation for users. I think for personalization, that we had a webinar on a few weeks ago, I think we can really leverage the desire and information that users are expressing in their utterances to tailor content that we're serving, messaging, to just really further personalize that conversation. I think also the models are just going to continue to improve. I think things like accuracy of classification, the the extent to which a lot of data is required, retaining context. I think all of these things will continue to improve. So it's just going to get like NLU is going to keep getting better. And I think also we might see that as consumers get more accustomed to interfacing with tools such as ChatGPT, where they can sort of type in like a very naturalistic human statement and then get a response, users might they might expect more and more that a lot of businesses or applications have that same type of naturalistic human language interface. So I think the use cases for NLU are going to continue sort of expanding and growing. And yeah, that's the content I have. So
That
let
that
me
was awesome. Thank you so much, Sophia.
thank you.
Really fascinating stuff, and I think like especially where you call out the link between what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago with the personalization to what you covered today was great. We did have a couple of questions that came through online for our listeners. I just want to take a look, make sure. Okay. So, first question here is: are there certain industries that lend themselves better to NLU over others?
I think that the nice thing about NLU is that it's very industry agnostic. Like I think it's more the use cases. So regardless of what industry you're in, I think like FAQs and information retrieval is like a huge one. So whether that's like retail or like insurance or travel,
Mhm.
any industry that there's a lot of information that users have questions about,
Right.
and they want an easy way to retrieve that information is a really, really strong one for NLU. So I think it can really, like, I don't think there's any one industry that is more like, I think it can work and be a really valuable part of any industry.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then any like sort of like ethical or security concerns using NLU? I think that's always the big question when it comes to any kind of AI and automation.
Yeah, I think the thing with NLU is you're getting real user utterances that you have to be careful with and protect. And even in scenarios where you're not asking for PII necessarily, or you're not expecting that users will provide PII, they still might come in and give that to you in their utterance. So I just think with like whatever, as with any type of data that we're collecting from users, it's important to have, really rock solid like security and masking around that data, and a data retention policy, and just to to take our responsibility very seriously as stewards of real user data.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think that's it from the audience. So again, really appreciate your time. This will be our last Pipe Up webinar of the year. So happy New Year to all of our listeners and watchers. And we'll be back next year, mid month, with another exciting topic from Pipestream. Thanks again, Sophia, and happy holidays.
Thank you.